Hey guys, it's Huang here, coming to you on Instagram Live. Here to answer some of your hand therapy questions, and I have gotten a few questions. So what we're gonna do is I'm gonna just wait, give everyone a couple of minutes to join us. Hope you guys are doing great. I decided to go ahead and work from home today, so this is the background of my house. I actually was thinking that I needed to get a whiteboard here, just like I have a whiteboard at my office. So sometimes I can go in there and like draw diagrams or draw out certain things. It's always nice to have like a visual. So I actually ordered a whiteboard just in case I'm home. So, which is great because sometimes I do work from home and I will, map out like a plan of what I'm doing or anything like that. So anyway, today what I'm going to do is I'm going to answer some questions about the shoulders and about the hand, and even give a tip. Someone asked a splinting question. So if you guys are joining me now, say hello. I can't always tell what people's names are, but if you've asked a question, that you can either ask a question right now, or normally what I do is I try to post the day before, so you guys haven't have an opportunity to put your questions in, and I can think of some of the answers for you and give you some examples. So today we're going to go over a couple shoulder questions. So a lot of people had shoulder questions for me, and about second set of questions I'm going to go through are some hand stiffness types of questions. And then the last thing I'm going to do is kind of cover some splinting, which I was actually just splinting with my staff last week. So it's perfect, the tip that I'm going to give. So some of the questions, this is one of the questions. Oh, I just wrote it myself. One of the questions is what to do about impingements with someone with a stroke. So I know when I first came out of school and I was just working with these stroke patients, they would, kind of move about here, and they would have so much pain here. The most important thing when working with stroke patients is to understand the dynamic between the scapula and the humerus, and then of course even the clavicle as well, because those are the three bones that essentially make up the shoulder complex, right? And then the shoulder complex essentially sits on the thoracic spine. So when someone has a stroke, they can't move pretty much anything, or if they can move, they have certain amounts of motion with some, and other muscles completely really tonic, and the whole rhythm of how their shoulder is moving is completely off. So if you're just cranking on someone's shoulder, I used to see that all the time. Hey, I did it too, because I didn't really understand it when I was first coming out of school, but they tend to have a lot of pain. They're going to have a lot of pain anyway, depending on how their body or how their the return of the muscles are going to be, or how much tone they have. But really, if you kind of think about the dynamics of the shoulder and how those three bones are, and then how it sits on the thoracic spine, if you have someone who's gotten an impingement with their shoulder, you've got to look at, like, are they sublux? Is that humerus bone just like completely out of socket, right? Before you start ranging them. The other thing that you should be looking at is like their scapula. So maybe doing some scapular mobilization. You've got to be able to maybe putting them in side lying and moving their scapula around. And even in that side lying position, you can work on some trunk rotations, right? So trunk rotation is you're going to get them moving to one side or to the other side. But if you get all of that moving, you're going to reduce how much those two bones are just like ramming into each other. So I would encourage you to work on the scapula and then work on trunk rotations to help with any kind of shoulder pain, shoulder impingement. I've got a couple of questions on rotator cuff and pain. So partial rotator cuff tears, yes, it is variable and is very, very challenging. So I always say one of the biggest difference between surgical versus non-surgical types of cases is when they're surgical, like, dude, you already know, like, you had surgery. This is what we're going to do. When they don't have surgery, one of the biggest things that you want to be looking at is what are their symptoms, right? I just had actually someone ask me, like, can you fix a partial tear? And yes, you can, but it depends on how severe it is already. If it's like more than 50% torn, like they are better off having surgery versus not having surgery. And you only try for a certain amount of time, and you want to see certain results in that short period of time that you're working with somebody. But yes, like rotator cuff tears that haven't had surgery, you're just looking at the symptoms. And what you always do is I always tell my staff, you want to look at the rhythm of how their arm's moving, you know, as compared to the well arm. And then you have to dissect it. You can dissect it from the front, you can dissect it from the back. Again, it goes back to rhythm of how they're moving. But I can honestly tell you, a lot of people have very overactive muscles in the front, right? So you have overactive pecs, you have overactive biceps, and then a lot of the muscles in the back, you know, a lot of your rotator cuff muscles are going to be weak. Your serratus anterior might not be moving as well. If your shoulder blade's like stuck to your ribs and your thoracic spine or your trunk area, if it's not moving that well, then your shoulder's not moving. Your shoulder's not moving that well. But it's not just this joint right here. You have to take a look at everything around it. So it's really important to understand the dynamics of the shoulder in order to treat it really well. But it can be complicated. And there's certain things that I always look at, and I always look at both arms when I watch someone move. I have them move one at a time, and then I have them move together as well. Another question, 9 weeks after a rotator cuff repair, and they still have pain. So I would say, and someone else had mentioned how they were able to improve someone's range of motion, but the amount of pain is still there. So I would encourage you to look at like, do they actually really have full range of motion? Because sometimes we think just because there's an improvement in range of motion that somehow their pain will completely go away. But you want to have full range of motion in all planes. So it's not just forward flexion, it's abduction, but mostly importantly, it's your rotation. It's internal, external rotation. So you're 9 weeks out, I would make sure that you're working in all planes and not just forward flexion. And yes, they do say, oh, by X number of weeks, you know, by 9 weeks, you're already able to do some strengthening and stuff like that. But you want to be able to move in a pain-free range. You definitely want to be able to strengthen in a pain-free range. So I would say take a look at, take a look at the muscles that are moving their arm. If you're doing a ton of forward flexion, maybe focus on motions and muscles that don't cause that kind of pain. So work a lot more on muscles towards the back, like your rotator cuff muscles, your lats. Doing things in prone are going to be more helpful versus just doing things in supine, where you're working all the muscles that people work every day. So prone exercises are really good. Prone extensions really good. Prone horizontal abductions really good. You know, the T's, Y's, and I's are really good if they have great range of motion. But I can tell you, I see a lot of people with, when they have a lot of pain, you're looking at like, well, are they impinging? Just because they had a rotator cuff repair doesn't mean that they're not impinging as they move. So a lot of times, a bicep's completely overactive. So if you're doing a ton of bicep curls and that kind of stuff, and everything that they're doing is moving and pulling them forward, then they're going to have this forward shift, and all the muscles in the back are not, putting them in a better position. So it's causing a lot more pain. So I would encourage you to take a look at that. Definitely look at the biceps if you have somebody who's still really, really painful. Let me see what else. How do you turn off the upper trap? It's really hard. You can't. The upper trap is constantly working. So, and the upper trap gets overactivated when other muscles are not strong enough. So if you're coming up and you see someone hiking, then I would encourage you, if they're overcompensating with their upper trap, it's other muscles that are much weaker. So it is worth taking a little step back and working on someone's rhythm of how they move. So if you're going to put them in a different position, whether it be supine, side lying, and you're working on how they're going to move in a more rhythmic, smoother motion, instead of, oh, let me just crank out the reps, or let me just say, like, you can get, so many degrees of forward flexion. But say, again, go back and look at the rhythm of the arm. What kind of exercises can you do that that doesn't encourage more of that? What kind of exercise can you do, or sometimes people just need some cueing so that they don't over activate their traps. So think about what kind of positions you would put someone in so that when you're exercising with them, they don't overuse it. A lot of times I'll put someone in side lying, to do some of their exercises. I'll put people in prone to do some of the exercises, and I always got an eye on how well they're moving versus just the fact that they're moving. So serratus anterior is another one. Is the scapula just completely stuck to the ribs and it's not moving in the way it's supposed to be moving? So that's something to look at as well. Some exercise like the T's, if you're in prone and you're doing like horizontal abduction, I call those T's, then that's going to work the upper traps, and you're going to have somebody who, like, if they're really weak, they're not going to be able to do it. So it might be worth it to do like a place and hold type of position, and then reset their scapula as you're doing it, or let them move in a smaller range so that they're not constantly over activating their upper trap. It's a lot of times their rhythm of motion is due to habit. If you can't move a certain way, your body very easily forgets how it's supposed to move, and they're kind of lost the rhythm of how they're moving. It doesn't really matter if it's in their shoulder, in their hand. People have a tendency to forget how to move, or their body really has a tendency to forget how they're moving. So you have to really reconnect like their brain back to like that body part. I do have a tendency to work with people, doing some manual and stretching first, and then doing some exercises and kind of going back and forth. But I know that it depends on the kind of patient volume that you have. So you have to think of like, what can I do within the time limits and space that I have? So those are the shoulder questions. I hope that's helped. And if you still have more questions about shoulders and stuff like that, I welcome them. And the more specific you can be when you're asking the questions is even better for me, because then I can answer it for you a little bit more specifically. So I'm going to move on to a couple of the hand stuff. People were asking how to cure stiffness. Time. Time, which nobody has and nobody has patience for. But when someone has like hand stiffness or wrist, so this is another one, 12 weeks post distal radius ORIF, and they are unable to reach full finger flexion. So it really kind of comes down to stiffness as well. One of the most important things I always talk about is if your PIP does not go into full extension, then you're always going to have that sensation of stiffness. So I always make sure that all my patients, I can go into full PIP extension, right? And so once they can go into PIP extension, you're also looking at like, are they PIP and DIP full extension? And then you also want to work on, MP, PIP, DIP, like full composite extension. I have freakishly like a lot of amount of extension, right? So you want to combat some of the stiffness, instead of just pushing them constantly to flexion, I will work in the opposite, work into extension, whether it be finger extension or wrist and finger extension, and then from there I'll go into flexion. And when it comes to fingers, don't just work into full flexion, work into hook fist as well. So don't just think that you need full fist, just for, to get pain or stiffness to be gone, but you actually want to get into a full hook. So that's MP. In 0, IPs go into full flexion. When you get full flexion of the IPs, you'll be surprised how much better you can go into full fist or full flexion of the whole hand. So if you are working with someone who's got a lot of stiffness, I would say, definitely make sure you're working on those PIPs and DIPs, work into extension. And you can even test that yourself. Just do a ton of different types of extension, types of exercises, and then see, if they can get into better flexion with less pain and stiffness. The other thing that people with hand problems tend to do is they tend to squeeze their fingers together and they can't move it. So a lot of times you can use the sponges, and sometimes if I'm working with them, I'll put my fingers in between theirs. And it's about the rhythm of how you're supposed to move, and sometimes people forget how they're supposed to move and they move incorrectly, and so they're trying with all their might. But in a way, if they just sort of half-assed it, they might actually move a little bit better with oh geez, somebody got home. So I am on a live right now, little girl. I was trying to get all done before she came home. It did not work. So on my last tip, those were the 2 main ones for hand stiffness. And then I have a major one for splinting, which, I love splinting. And I was actually training with my staff last week. And when you have a splint that you're doing and someone's really not happy and you just can't seem to get it right, after about 2 tries or 2 types of adjustments, I say throw that sucker right back in the water and redo it all over again. Not only does it get you good practice, but remember, when you start to make little changes and you're heating up one spot here and heating up another spot, depending on the type of material you have, then your material is going to move and it's going to change shape. It just can't help it. It's a plastic material. It's melted and molded using hot water. So when you start dipping one spot over another spot, it's really, really challenging to then think that if I move one spot or another spot, somehow it doesn't affect the whole chain, right? So I would objectively look at that and say, okay, Mr. So-and-so, I totally understand that this doesn't fit you well. Let's take a look at what's bothering you. And then I'll go and I'll just look at object. Okay, this part's bothering you. Can I fix it easily? Sometimes they don't know how to put it on right. They don't know they can adjust it down, and it's very important to explain exactly the purpose of the splint, exactly what it's supposed to do, how it's supposed to be fitted, how you're supposed to actually adjust it, because it's not set in stone, that it does require a certain amount of adjustments by you, Mr. So-and-so, right? And if it still doesn't fit, after that, I'll just throw the whole thing. After 2 attempts, forget it. It's more time consuming to keep putting little spots here and there. I say throw the whole thing back in the water, start all over again, and then just accommodate certain areas that bothers them. I'll say that, but I never change the principles of the splint. So sometimes people will say, oh, well, I don't want it that long. Can't you make it shorter, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, well, the purpose of the splint is to not allow you to do X, Y, and Z. And I'm not making it shorter just because you want it to make it shorter, I'm not going to make it longer because you want it longer. I might make it wider if it's too narrow on you, but I'm not going to just, wrap things all around. So a lot of times patients might come to you and say, well, can't you just wrap it all around, or can't you just make it shorter because I don't like how long it is. You want to accommodate them in terms of the comfort, but you never want to sacrifice the principles and the quality in which that splint is being used for. So if you've tried twice to make them happy and they're just not happy because something is wrong, some people have bony arms, bony hands, throw that sucker right back in the water, just readjust it. All right. So those are my tips on splinting. So thank you so much for joining me and asking your wonderful questions. And if you also, we'll do it again next week on Monday at 4 p.m. and I'll let you know. I'll post it to remind you, but anytime you guys have questions, feel free to message me and I'll answer them on Monday. All right, thanks for joining me. I will talk to you guys later. Bye.